We're live. Okay. Hello, how are you? Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I had kind of almost a catastrophe with trying to log in. But hi, how are you guys? Give it just a second. Let people catch on to the fact that I'm here. Hello, how are you? Before I start, I want to give a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about trauma today, and I'm going to be talking about not specific trauma, but more so just different types of trauma, why we experience trauma. But I want to make sure that no one is triggered, so I did want to go ahead and issue a trigger warning. If trauma is something that you do not want to be talking about or handling, then it's probably best to go ahead and skip this video. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So my name is Kristen Circe Aramora, and I am a social worker. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I do want to say that anything on this video is my intellectual property unless I am citing a different source, which I will be doing a little bit. And excuse me, I do have like little note cards. I don't know how you guys do 30-minute lives without having something small to prompt you with. So if you have any tips and tricks, put them in the comments below. But I'm using a little old school note cards. So as I said, I am a social worker and I specialize in trauma. I am almost finished with school, my master's degree, and I will be a licensed master social worker in May. And I will be then continuing on to finish up getting my private licensing to be a licensed clinical social worker and practicing as a trauma therapist. If you would like to be in touch with me, please do so at my Instagram at A Desert in Bloom. Again, that is A Desert in Bloom. A Desert in Bloom is a trauma-focused mental health service for women, and we take a 21st century approach to women's mental health. We acknowledge and recognize that there is an interconnectedness between the mind, body, spirit, and soul. And so we strive to utilize all those things in helping women with mental health challenges. So again, that's A Desert in Bloom. You can look forward to videos such as this every week or bi-weekly on my Instagram. Thanks so much. So let me kind of jump in and let you know my background a little bit and why I'm here today and why I want to talk about trauma. I started about 7 years ago my journey as a social worker, and I worked in anti-sex trafficking and I worked in domestic violence at a crisis shelter as a advocate. And then about 4 years ago, I kind of found my heart. I got a job working as a high needs case manager for children in mental and behavioral health services through a social services agency. And that is really where I first got my exposure to trauma work. Most of the kids on my caseload were in the foster care system, wards of the state, and most of them were somehow, unfortunately, involved in our juvenile justice system. So I spent a lot of time in court with my kiddos, fighting for them to receive the mental health services that they needed, as opposed to getting punished and put in juvenile corrections. So I had a lot of experience in court, but last year in March, before all of this kind of crazy stuff happened with COVID, the last thing that I was actually able to go out and physically do, I was an intern trauma therapist at this social services agency, and I was actually subpoenaed to testify in court as the therapist for my client. So I went into court, and as I said, I'm super familiar with court, but talk about a trauma triggering experience. I was on the stand testifying about trauma for 43 minutes. I was explaining trauma, explaining the effects of trauma on the brain, explaining trauma response and what trauma exposure is. And when I finished, I was out in the hallway, and the lawyers, the Assistant Attorney General's office lawyers, and the prosecutor for the state came up to me and said, I've worked in this field for decades working with children, and I've never really heard an explanation for trauma and for what it does and how it affects us. And I thought, wow, if people in my own circle, in my own profession, don't have a super clear understanding of trauma and what it is and what it does to our brain and how it affects us, then I can imagine what people who don't work in my profession, who aren't clinicians and in social services and social workers, don't know about trauma and about how it affects us in our lives on a regular, daily basis. So that's why I'm here today. I am going to go through what trauma is. I'm going to talk to you about what it does in the brain a little bit, and then I'm going to walk you through the magic, which is the way that you can self-regulate and get yourself out of that trauma response. And that's what we're going to do. So let me go ahead and jump right on into talking about trauma. So what is trauma? I hear usually a lot of answers like trauma is this big event that happens. And the truth of the matter is that anytime your brain perceives a threat, you can have a trauma reaction. You cannot predict a traumatic effect of a specific event. And I've learned about this from Dr. Eric Gentry at the Arizona Trauma Institute. I've taken quite a few of his teachings of trauma. And so basically what he teaches and what we say is when your brain perceives a threat, you go into a trauma response. That threat response is activated, and when you stay in that threat response, then that's when we say you are traumatized. So let's talk about our brain, this big, beautiful, magical thing on top of our heads that holds so many answers and is so mysterious, and we continue to learn more and more about the brain through neuroscience and clinical neuroscience. So I'm just going to give you a brief. So there's two parts of the brain, right? Okay. There is this part of the brain that is the narrative and rational part of the brain. And then we have this part of the brain that is the sensory, emotional part of the brain, okay? So when you experience a trauma, that trauma is imprinted in that sensory emotional part of the brain. So you experience a trauma, and that trauma gets imprinted, I'll say it again, in the sensory emotional part of the brain. So what happens? We have a trauma, we perceive a threat. It goes right into that sensory emotional part of our brain. And that sensory emotional part of our brain says, oh my gosh, I'm perceiving a threat. I'm in danger. I have to take over. We must preserve energy. We must be ready to fight, to have flight, or just to freeze and stay still and get really, really, able to fight because we're going to die and we have to preserve ourselves. So that sensory emotional part where the trauma gets imprinted takes over the rational narrative part of the brain, the part of the brain that gives language to events and allows us to say, okay, I'm feeling scared, but in reality, I'm not in danger and I'm fine. That part of the brain is gone. We just are reacting on the sensory part. So that's when we experience different types of reactions. And the thing to understand is that you can experience these kind of trauma reactions at any time and in any kind of circumstance. So when the rational part is gone, we're all operating on that sensory level. So what are you doing when you're operating on the sensory part of your brain? Are you screaming and yelling and freaking out? Are you paralyzed with fear and unable to move and hardly breathe? Are you running away. You've got to get out of here. I can't be here anymore. That's what happens when we operate in the sensory part of our brain. So I'm going to give you a little example just to make it a little bit more clear. But when we go through life and we are trauma triggered, our brain perceives a threat, the sensory part takes over, and we experience things such as stress, anxiety, and those reactions. We're freaking out. We're paralyzed in fear. We're running away from things. So that's what trauma does to the brain. We talk in trauma work about different types of reactions. I've already given a few examples of fight or flight. So when we have this window of tolerance that all of us are able to operate in, and when something kicks us outside of that window of tolerance, we have a flight or fight response. Our sensory part takes over. We've got to get out of here. We're going to die, or I have to fight for my life. We're in danger. When you are operating in that window of tolerance in your body and you are pushed kind of under that window of tolerance, we see a freeze response. So you're paralyzed to move. You can't breathe. Be still. Preserve your energy. You may need it later. Just don't move, right? So those are the three types of trauma responses that we see. So I've kind of said our brain can jump into a threat response in really everyday situations. And sometimes that is linked to a bigger trauma. There are larger catastrophic traumatic events that happen to everyone, or there are events in our lives that our brain imprints as a trauma. And those are the big things that I'm not talking about today. But that's the kind of trauma that you can work through with a trauma therapist, with a clinician. We have amazing modalities that we're able to use to help people overcome trauma and to help kind of take those big traumatic events and like push them out of the brain so that they are not just being totally stored all the time. And we have things such as EMDR, cognitive-based trauma therapy, narrative exposure therapy. Those are some of the ways that psychotherapists can work through these bigger traumas. So what I'm talking about today are the little instances that we are having that threat perception and having a trauma-based reaction where we're freaking out and we're stressed out and we're having anxiety. If you are struggling with deeper trauma, if you are diagnosed with PTSD and you meet those requirements, I really encourage you to seek out the help of a professional trauma therapist. There is freedom and there is healing for you, and I really encourage you to go after that, and you deserve it in your life. So let's see, I'm going to give an example of trauma. So I'm driving down the streets. I'm in Phoenix, right? And Phoenix it's pretty scary to drive here. I lived in LA for 10 years, and I can honestly tell you that I would rather drive in Los Angeles on the freeways any day than drive in Phoenix, because people in Phoenix are like all aggression and no skill. That's what I say. So you're driving down the streets of Phoenix, right? I'm in my car. I'm going 70 in the middle lane of traffic in a 65, and some guy is riding my butt. And now I notice this guy is riding my butt. He's being aggressive. Aggressive is not something that I necessarily handle well. I'm starting to kind of get a little bit panicky and sweaty. This guy's being aggressive. What's he gonna do? He drives around me, he honks his horn, he flips me off, and he's yelling at me, and I can't hear what he's saying, but clearly I can see in the window he's doing like that rah kind of a thing, and then he zooms past me. Okay, in that moment when I'm experiencing that situation, I'm experiencing aggression, I'm feeling fear, and I am being triggered in my brain. There's a threat. I am perceiving a threat. Am I actually in danger? At that moment, no, I am not. Now, if he pulls over and chases me, then I am in danger, but I'm not actually in danger, but my brain is perceiving a threat. And so what is happening is that sensory part of my brain is taking over this rational narrative part that tells me, Kristen, you're not in danger. You're going to be okay. It doesn't matter. My sensory part has taken over, and I'm going to be ready. I am ready. I am either going to fight. I'm going to go drive to this car and honk at him and flip him off and, get back at him, or I'm going to drive away as fast as I can. I'm going to flee. I'm out of there. I don't want to deal with this aggressive dude. I have no idea what he's going to do. Or I'm just paralyzed in fear. I may be say I'm on the phone on my Bluetooth, and I'm talking to my husband, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this guy, he's freaking me out. I start screaming, I start crying. So those are those traumatic stress responses that my brain is perceiving because of the situation that's triggering me. And so there's really good news when you find yourself in these situations that you find yourself in every day. When you're being triggered and that sensory part of your brain has taken over, causing in you a reaction that you do not want to have to sustain. And here's the news, and Dr. Gentry says it best. You cannot sustain anger, anxiety, stress, or threat response in a body that is relaxed. Let me say it again, a little bit louder for you in the back. You cannot sustain anger, anxiety, stress. You can't sustain it in a body that is relaxed. That's the magic. So how do we do that? How do we have a moment where our body is in overdrive and we're freaking out and we are able to regulate ourselves, relax our bodies, and alleviate that stress response? Our rational narrative brain comes in and says, we're okay. Everything's good. Let's chill out. Well, the answer is that it's super easy. And I'm going to teach you something that you can do anywhere at any time. You can do it in your car. I do it while I'm having conversations with people. Because of what I do for a living, everywhere I go, people want to, end up wanting to tell me something about their lives. And sometimes they come up and say the things to me, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like these big things. And I'll say, okay, I need to relax my body. I'm having a response to this, and I will do this trick in my head. So this trick is called the wet noodle. And this is Dr. Eric Gentry from the Arizona Trauma Institute's way of regulating the body, the wet noodle. And I am taking it from him and using it with his permission, because I think it is absolutely the best way to do this. And I want to tell you, moms, when your kid is freaking out, learn the wet noodle. You can use the wet noodle on them. They love it. Trust me. So let's wet noodle. How do we do this? Okay, we're gonna sit. We're sitting. I'm sitting. And my feet are on the ground. And I invite you to soften your gaze, or you can let your eyes be a bit heavy, whatever feels comfortable to you. And we're gonna sit, and we're just gonna breathe a little bit. And as you're breathing, we're gonna start at the top of your head and go down to the tips of your tippy toes. And as we're moving from the top of your head down through the body, I want you to think about every part of the body that we are going through as turning into wet noodles. And when I say wet noodles, you all can picture this, right? That's why I love the wet noodles, and especially for kids. A bowl of wet noodles. Let's turn our body into it. So let's give it a try. Feet on the ground. Eyes resting comfortably, however is comfortable for you. Starting at the top of your head, picturing everything turning into wet noodles. Wet noodles. Noodles in my eyes. Noodles in my jaw. Noodles in my neck. Noodles in my shoulder, noodles in my chest, Noodles in my stomach, noodles down my arms, noodles in my thighs, noodles in my knees, noodles in my calves, noodles in my toes, and just sit. 2, 3, 4, 5. Gently flutter your eyes open if you've had them closed. Take a deep breath. How do you feel right now? Are you stressing out? No, I don't think you are. Because I'm not, and like I said, this is the magic. So this is what it feels like to have a relaxed body. So when I'm driving in my car and somebody comes up behind me and is aggressive and starts to pull around me and flip me off and all those things, and I am triggered. Okay, Kristen, I need to wet noodle. I'm driving in my car and I'm just picturing these wet noodles in my whole body. And suddenly I find myself relaxed and I can breathe. And I can start to tell myself, Kristen, you're safe. You're fine. That guy was a jerk, but you're okay and you're safe. And then that response is no longer there. I'm not operating in this just panic of a response. So that's the wet noodle trick. I like to incorporate, let's see, how much time do I have? About 4 minutes. I like to incorporate a couple of different things in doing like an exercise. And when I come out of being relaxed, not if I'm in my car, but if I'm at home, sometimes in my car, but mostly if I'm at home and I need to relax myself and I want to do some wet noodle, I like to do breath work as well. And I like to end my breath work wet noodle session by putting narrative language into my head that is affirming and that is positive. And so I've created what I call an I am list. And the I am list, I started doing this with kiddos in the foster care system to give them a sense of stability, safety, security, because they're being moved around all over the place. But I tell them there are some things inside of you that make you who you are, that make you uniquely the only you on the entire planet. And those are things that do not change no matter where you are, no matter who you're with, no matter what someone says to you. Those are you. Those are your I ams. Example for me, I am loving. I am caring. I am a warrior. I am a fierce advocate. I am tender-hearted. And those are things about me that make me Kristen and the things that don't change. So I want to walk you through a breathing and then we'll wet noodle. And then we'll put those into our head, an I am. So think of an I am for yourself right now. Okay, so we're gonna breathe in through the nose for 4. We're gonna hold for 4, and we're going to exhale for 4. And as you're exhaling, you're going to think wet noodle. So in through the nose for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through the mouth. 2, 3, 4, and wet noodle. And just sit with it. Keep breathing. Allow yourself to relax. If you want to repeat your breathing, you can repeat your breathing. Ending in that wet noodle state where we're just nice and relaxed. And then I'm going to start to focus maybe on the things in the room that you smell. What kind of sounds do you hear in this relaxed state, and use your senses to bring you back to yourself. And then I'm going to put my I ams in. I am loving. I am caring. I am a warrior. I am tender-hearted. I am a fierce advocate. in. Hold for 4. Wet noodle. Okay, I wanted to walk through another exercise, and I'm a little bit, I was a little bit late getting on, so I am out of time. But I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope that I've given you some insight into understanding trauma responses, stress responses, anxiety responses, and remembering that you cannot continue to exist in that state when you are in a relaxed body. That is the magic, is being in a relaxed body. So go out there and give it a shot. Wet noodle yourselves and see how you feel. See if there's a difference for you in your ability to get out of those threat responses, be out of that stress, that anxiety, relaxed, and coming back into your rational narrative part of your brain that says, I'm safe, I'm okay. And let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to DM me, a desert in bloom, ADesertinBloom, and give a follow. And thank you so much. I appreciate it. Almost 30 Nation. All right. Bye.